All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our first speaker for the fall 2020 semester. I would like to introduce Mr. Steve Cook, who is the Deputy President of Dynetics and the President of Dynetics Technical Solutions. Mr. Cook has an extensive background in space-related projects and technologies, having worked for NASA for several years at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville. He is an award winner, having been recognized with the NASA Outstanding Achievement Medal, among many other awards. He also served on President Trump's NASA transition team. We are really honored to have such a prestigious speaker with us tonight. Please virtually welcome Mr. Steve Cook.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Big roll tide. Big roll tide. Dr. Ricks and I were just talking. Some of you probably heard I was down at the game this weekend with my son, who's a PhD student there, and it was a fabulous, and his wife. It was a great weekend. Always great to be on campus. I don't think I've ever seen Bryant Denny or the quad. Actually, you can see the quad on a game day, and it was actually kind of cool. But anyway, I know we're all learning to deal with this new normal of COVID, and I really appreciate y'all taking time, because I know you got a lot of things you're crashing for, and listening to somebody drone on about a topic probably is not the most exciting thing you want to do. So I'm going to try to keep it interesting tonight, and I want to give a different perspective on this whole topic. But before I dive in, Dr. Ricks, just one more comm check. Are we good?
Yep, good for me.
Good deal. Good deal. All right. So my topic tonight is probably one you may have heard about, may have read about. And I want to dive in a little more detail, and I want to talk specifically about what's called this age of great power competition. What does that mean? And I want to talk specifically about what Alabama is doing as a part of that. And probably as a hint, as you can tell from the opening graphic, it's really about the U.S., China, and Russia, and how we're all playing together today, and how things have fundamentally changed. And so look forward to kind of getting you up to speed from my perspective on that. Like I said, I've been in the aerospace and defense business for 33 years. I'm an old guy. I started off as a co-op in 1987 out in San Diego, working on the Titan Centaur rocket. And I've gotten to do a lot of cool things, including work on human spacecraft at NASA. And now I've spent about the last 11 years in private industry, having an awful lot of fun as well, and learning a lot more about the defense side of a business, and but the two are very, very interrelated. So let me go on to my next chart. So we'll talk about what is this new age of great power competition, and what does it mean? You know, following 9/11, and actually I think probably quite a few here tonight were not alive when that happened, which is kind of amazing. That's probably going to be, we're coming up on the generations that won't have lived through that, or certainly you were too small to remember it, if anything. I don't. Dr. Ricks and I remember exactly where we were, exactly when these events happened, and these are one of the things that just kind of froze in our mind that we remember. But you know, following that, it was undeniable that our homeland is no longer a sanctuary. America is a target, whether from terrorists seeking to attack our citizens, or malicious cyber activity that's attacking personal or commercial or government infrastructure, or even our political infrastructure. And there's a lot of discussion obviously been around that for the last few years. And so new threats to commercial and military use of space are emerging, while increased digital connectivity in all aspects of our life. And I love it. I mean, I have Alexa, I have every connected device you can imagine. But you know what? That makes us also an awful lot more vulnerable than we were just a few years ago. You know, I would argue that this whole ability to go virtual to the extreme that we were able to take our nation to has really largely been enabled, probably even in just the last 5 years, because of the amount of broadband that's out there, and the sheer bandwidth that's available. That just, I mean, it really just continues to grow. Anyway, as I was talking about, we saw a fundamental shift at 9/11 about 19 years ago, and but you know what happened was, really, there's a lot of observers that have kind of concluded that the post-Cold War era of international relations really is something that began in the late 1980s, when Dr. Ricks and I were about your age, in early 1990s, when the wall fell down, Russia opened up, the Soviet Union fell apart, and you just had Russia and its satellite states. That whole era that began late 80s really started to fade a few years after 9/11. And then by 2014, really, the international environment had shifted to a fundamentally different environment, to where we had renewed great power competition with both China and Russia, and challenges faced by these two countries, which and to the fundamental international order that's really existed since the end of World War II. And this shift to renewed great power competition was acknowledged in, and it's not, this isn't a, this is really a bipartisan thing. President Obama's 2015 national military strategy, and then in more detail in 2017 by President Trump's national security strategy, and then in 2018 his national defense strategy, all said, hey, we've got to reorient our defense to not just be, we became almost uber focused on terrorism, and obviously with the fight in Iraq and Afghanistan that went down. And frankly, while we were focused there, China and Russia were making moves to try to renew and regain their place on the world stage. So when you think about the focus of this new great power competition, what we're really talking about is Eurasia, Russia, China, and everything around that. And that's really the center of this new conflict. Eurasia, interestingly enough, is home. That picture right there is home to 70% of the world's population, most of the world's natural resources, and as much as we'd like it to be the United States, right there is the largest economic activity on the planet. You know, our policy, United States policy, is really underpinned by the belief that the countries of Eurasia can't be counted on to prevent, through their own actions, the emergence of regional empire builders. And they may need assistance from one or more countries outside of Eurasia to be able to do this dependably. And that's really kind of been the centerpiece, since the end of World War II. So I'll talk about a little bit of the rise of what's going on. The rise of China is arguably the most important geopolitical development of the 21st century, at least so far. And we're just, barely into it. The country's rapid economic growth has really given it the ability to influence global events to the degree it's not enjoyed in centuries. I mean, until President Nixon opened up trade with them in the early 1970s, they just started kind of re-emerging at that point on the international scene. And this newfound clout that they've gotten has really allowed China to start projecting its power farther than ever before, and it's begun to do so with some pretty surprisingly aggressiveness that a lot of times you just don't hear about, and effectiveness. China is leveraging military modernization, influence operations, and frankly, predatory economics to coerce their neighboring countries to reorder this what we call the Indo-Pacific region to their advantage. And there's a lot of data out there to support that. If we zoom in a little further and we look at kind of a core interest area of China, it's what we would call the South China Sea. And that's where we've seen most of their expansionary interest here. And just to kind of explain the chart here a little bit, you've got the pink is countries that cooperate militarily with China, and you've got the dark green, which is our U.S. allies, and then you've got countries that kind of typically cooperate militarily with us in green, and then ones that work with both of us in the hashed, and that's kind of what that means. So, at the southern end of that, what we call the U.S. forward defense ring, that's really Singapore, and it swings around, includes the Philippines, Taiwan, southern end of Japan, all the way over to Afghanistan, Iraq region. This area here is the second busiest sea lane in the world, carrying about a third of the global shipping. So much of it is Chinese commerce with other countries. Almost 40% of China's trade in 2016 transited through this area, and it contains a huge wealth of oil and gas. And if you're students of history, that's caused a lot of wars in the past, and started the Pacific Theater War in World War II, started over natural resources in this area. But nobody knows quite how much is there, but there's a lot. China claims nearly all of this whole South China Sea as what they call a 9-dash line demarcation line, which goes from Vietnam to Malaysia, the west side of Philippines, and the Taiwan Strait. And frankly, their increasingly aggressive actions to really make a claim on this have just raised tensions in the area. And though they've kind of claimed this territory since really after World War II, about 1947, they really hadn't pressed this issue until recently, until 2009. And when they actually wrote a letter to the Secretary General of the UN claiming that they had indisputable sovereignty over the islands of the South China Sea and its adjacent waters. That's pretty direct. Now, what's been their biggest obstacle? The U.S. Navy. The goal of the U.S. since World War II has been to keep shipping lanes free and maintain a political and military balance in the area. But this has really irked off China. They don't like that, and they feel encircled by us. And literally, they kind of are. If you look at where our defense ring is here, and from all of these allies in our area, and they see it as limiting their free access to the seas. So in its efforts to break this containment, they've been aligning more of their interest with Russia, and with arguably potentially volatile results. One example of this, of being able to flex their muscles in this area, is they're building up naval forces and establishing naval bases on many of the reefs and other features in that area. And this is just one example of that. They built this airstrip on the Spratly Islands, which are also, by the way, claimed by Vietnam and the Philippines. And they forward deployed surface-to-air missiles on the Paracel Islands, also claimed by Vietnam. So they're putting military bases, they're building these literally kind of islands on these coral reefs, and putting bases on them that are pretty active. In addition to that, they've been building what we call a blue water navy, and that means outside of the littoral areas from around the country, but they can go and project their power. This is one of their aircraft carriers. They now have an aircraft carrier that certainly allow them to project power across a much wider area. And they have an advantage over us today. And if you read recently, Secretary of Defense Esper has talked specifically about we need to get the total number of U.S. ships up. That's largely in reaction to the Chinese, because they have an advantage over us now in a deployable number of ships, and are narrowing that technological gap that they've got with us. So then when you take that plus the geographic advantage, obviously because they're right there, it's approaching a level of capability sufficient to challenge us in their immediate periphery, if you will. So they're also actively working to limit our ability to project power. This happens to be one of their ceremonies, or they rolled some of their weapons down the way. And these are boost glide hypersonic missile systems, the DF-17. They're very unabashed about it. And frankly, they have a lead over us in this. And that's really sad to me, because it happened on, quote, my watch, well, my and your professor's watch, because at one point this was our technology. Well, frankly, they got a hold of it and they weaponized it. And while I would argue, still have a technological edge in this arena, they have quickly weaponized this activity, and they did it before us. And they've actually now, in the last several months, have announced these boost glide systems are nuclear capable. Why is this a problem? Well, having a system that can pop up out of the atmosphere, dive back in, and then glide at hypersonic speeds and dive in, their nickname is carrier killers, because that's what they can do. Well, so what does that mean to our carrier groups? You can't move out of the way. You can't move a carrier group out of the way fast enough to deal with something like this. And frankly, we don't have a good defense against it. In fact, our defense is quite weak, and so is theirs, because this is very hard to hit, technologically hard to pull off. So that blocks our access to our carriers by its land-based hypersonic missiles, which they deploy down along this southern edge right here. Right, so they're deploying these along this edge, along with their surface-to-air missiles. So you can't get in, and oh, by the way, we're going to push you further and further out. And then you factor in things like the carrier. That's what happens. Now, that's also backed up by nuclear submarine launched ballistic missiles, which they have, and a increasingly integrated land, sea, and air, space, and cyber capability. So they're really ramping it up in a hurry. to be able to do these kind of things. They've also, we believe, built a very, very long underground tunnel to store their nuclear arsenal of ballistic missiles for long-range strikes. So left unchecked, this is clearly going to tip the scales in favor of Chinese regional dominance and tend to keep our capabilities out of the South China Sea. And it's going to then influence neighboring countries to weaken their reliance on U.S. protection. And we'll talk about that some more in a little bit. So this plays right into this group. So the ultimate high ground, space. You may not know this. China has actually had a telescope, an operating telescope on the moon since 2013. And they are working to put humans on the moon, and they're building the infrastructure to do that. They have a launch vehicle now capable of doing that. They have a spacecraft that's in development to do that. And they're following our steps and our plan to be able to do that. And, you know, that literally is the ultimate high ground. And while we are happy to share it with others, we certainly don't want to be bested by that. And that we'll get to a program I'll talk about at the end. So in addition to China and their influence, you've also got the re-emergence of Russia. The rise to power of Mr. Putin has really led to their resurgence on the world stage. You know, and a great example of this, back in 2014, they re-annexed the Crimea, and largely it was ignored. It was amazing, you know, it was bully. I mean, they just rolled right in there and took it over. And in addition to that, they're again developing weapons which threaten our interest. They love to use their veto authority in the UN to help their means out. Frankly, they would love to get rid of NATO and to change the emerging European and Middle East security and the economic structures to favor them, right? So they want to get in and cut deals that these other countries will help them. So when you combine that with emerging technologies to subvert democratic processes, we've seen that here. We've seen that in other countries in eastern Ukraine, in Georgia, Crimea, some of their former satellite states. When you add that with their expanding and modernizing nuclear arsenal, you know, the challenge here is clear. They are not sitting back. And much like the Chinese, they're ahead of us in weaponizing hypersonics. This is a flight test that they've advertised. They've also announced they have a system with a nuclear tip capability. It's called the Avangard. It's launched on top of an ICBM. But unlike that regular missile warhead, it can make sharp maneuvers in or out, and it can make it very unpredictable about where it's going to go. And in January of this year, they test launched its Shirkan hypersonic cruise missile from a ship for the first time, and they're planning more tests from nuclear submarines. So right now, the U.S. is in catch-up mode, and we'll talk about what we're doing about that here in a little bit. So, you know, fundamentally, this is having an effect, you know, over time on destabilizing international order. And we have a very resilient international order that was established after World War II. If you think about it, right, the order that got established after World War I didn't work, right? The League of Nations disaster. Within 2 decades, you've got Hitler's rise to power marching across Europe, and they largely, including us, did nothing. You look at how long we've maintained peace after World War II, and obviously the world order that's been in place since then has been very, very resilient, but it is weakening. And I think we've got to be careful about looking at these things, because our goal has been to maintain stable order, maintain democratic processes. We're not looking to expand. Frankly, we're the only country that's not looking to expand our territories and what we want to do. And our network of alliances and partnerships have really been the backbone of global security, I would argue. So, you know, frankly, they're now undermining the order from within the system. And then you throw in rogue regimes like North Korea and Iran, which are trying to be regional destabilizers through their pursuit of nuclear weapons or sponsorship of terrorism, and it gets even more interesting. So you add all that together, there is a lot of things going on in the world to destabilize what we've got. Now, you add in new and rapidly changing threats. They're no longer just kinetic in nature. It's not just a missile or an airplane or a helicopter doing something. you've got cyber and electronic warfare that are central in this new great power competition, because frankly, you can sit remotely and do all kinds of damage. And if we compare past threats to today's threats, the rate at which they're evolving is much, much, much faster. And that's harder for everybody to counter. And this is really true in all domains, from space to maritime to ground, and from platforms to weapons and cyber. But in the past, we didn't face the kind of cyber threats that we have today, which is coming at us from all kinds of different vectors. We call them threat vectors. We do a lot of threat analysis work at Dynetics, and it's incredible the number of the vectors that these threats come in. So anticipation in the cyber domain is critical. You got to be thinking ahead, right? You got to be thinking chess, not checkers. And frankly, you got to be thinking Vulcan chess, which is 3D, right? And thinking 5 steps ahead. And you can't just be, well, I'm being anticipating and getting ready. I've got to be able to rapidly address those threats when they come on. And then here, new technologies and techniques from the world of artificial intelligence are going to play a big role. So, not to paint a doom and gloom picture, because I don't. We're not just ignoring this, and we're quite active in dealing with these threats. And it's taking place in a more global, commercially driven, and very rapidly evolving technological environment, which is both an opportunity and a detriment. The need for speed and agility has never been more important. Typically, it takes about 15 years to get a weapon system in the field from an idea to fully operationally fielded. We can't stand that anymore, right? That just will not work. And it's paramount to keep our nation safe. But it's not just enough to be fast. The capabilities we put out there have to be secure enough to support our national security missions. So let me play I want to play a video here that's a good one. This is the Army's Rapid Capabilities and Technologies Office, which is right here in Redstone Arsenal. They have the mission to counter and deal with a hypersonic threat. Let me see if I can get this to play.
You know, we live in a time of great power competition. But great power competition does not have to mean great power conflict. We must ensure that we are never outraged, outdone, or overmatched. The rapid development and demonstration of hypersonic capabilities across land, air, and sea to ensure that this doesn't happen.
The advantage of the laser, what we call the MML, is that we have the ability to have an unlimited magazine when it comes to unmanned aerial systems as well as rockets, artillery, and mortars.
Winning matters, and hypersonics will help us win.
Dr. Ricks, does that play okay on your machine?
Yes, sir. Sounded good to me.
Good deal. All right. So that's just one service. That's the U.S. Army that's right here in Huntsville, Alabama. So we get back to my topic, is what are we doing about it? You know, they have the responsibility for 2 different things: an offensive system in hypersonics, and developing that and fielding that by 2023. And they're partnered up with the Navy on that activity. Actually, Dynetics is one of the contractors. We have the U.S.'s only production facility for those glide bodies, like you saw on that DF-17. That is being built right here in Huntsville, Alabama. And they're also fielding the next generation of air and missile defense systems, using things like very, very high-powered lasers to be able to take out cruise missiles and UAS systems and mortars, because they said you really want an unlimited magazine. And we can't be overmatched. We can't be overpowered. But the goal of it's not to use it, right? The goal of it is we don't want to. Competition doesn't mean we have to get into a fight, because nobody wants that. That leads to bad for everybody. But if if your enemy doesn't see you as a threat, then what are they going to do? You know, if they have a need to and want to expand regionally, then they're going to do it. So this renewal of this great power competition has really led to a focus by the U.S. military services on development of new, not just new technologies though, but new operational concepts. That is, new ways of employing our military forces, particular for countering improved Chinese what they call anti-access or area denial, or you hear it called A2AD, military forces in that Indo-Pacific region I showed you earlier, which by the way sometimes is called Hollywood to Bollywood. These new operational concepts are really focused on integrating us, right? You know, typically, you know, Air Force did their thing, Army did their thing, Navy did their thing, and they talk sometimes, but not a lot. But now we've got to drag it all together, and not only in that space, but we got to integrate our electromagnetic information and cyberspace into that, and so we have an integrated response. And being able to have less concentrated distribution of forces and have more wider disposition and distribution of them, making technology, right, networking technology that's secure is absolutely critical to be able to do that. Making more use of unmanned vehicles as a part of our force architectures to do these things. And the fact that many of these technological innovations are today coming from the commercial sector means that I'll call it state actors, China and Russia, and non-state actors will also have access to them. And so people think about, well, they're trying to steal our technology from their secret, our secrets. And yes, they go after classified technology, but they're after everything. And they have a giant vacuum that gathers up all this information, and then they share it with everybody. We don't do that, right? We don't take our intelligence data and make it available to the commercial sector, right? That's just not something we do, and I'm glad we don't. But they do, and we've got to keep that in mind. So if we're going to keep our technological edge, we've got to fundamentally change our industry culture, where we get our money from, and then how we protect all of it. Part of that, I would argue, is bolstering our partnerships, right? So that this renewal, particularly of the great power competition with Russia, which again we saw with Ukraine, said, hey, how are we going to bolster our military operations around Europe? We can't afford to send everybody everywhere, right? Deploying forces is really expensive. So that says you got to bolster things like NATO. And there's been a lot of politicization of that, but frankly, if you boil it all down, we have really bolstered our NATO capabilities in the last several years, and including actions to include our military presence in key areas like Poland, including using our technology for missile defense, such as the Standard Missile 3. That's one of the core elements of our missile shield, and we're deploying those to places like Poland and Japan to be able to do that. And renewed concern over those capabilities has got Russia not real happy, and so that obviously says that we're probably doing the right thing. So I want to talk the rest of this. This is a huge topic. Google it, you'll read about it. Great power competition and what we're doing about it. But I want to wrap with what is the state of Alabama doing to enable. And the bottom line is there's a lot of things that Alabama is doing. Number one that you may not be aware of. Down in Mobile, we build the next generation littoral combat ship. This is a trimaran. I've actually been on one of these. Not out at sea. That would be really cool. Especially where this picture was taken, which is San Diego. And it's an aluminum hull ship. It's very, very fast, and it has very little draft. So we can get into littoral, other words, very, very shallow water areas. And obviously by its shape, you can tell it has a reduced radar cross section. That was developed and is produced in Mobile, Alabama. Go over to the southeastern side of the state, and that's southwestern side. Go to the southeastern side. We are, and then Huntsville. That connection between Redstone Arsenal and Fort Rucker has the responsibility for all Army aviation. Huntsville has the responsibility for upgrading and fielding new aviation capabilities, both manned, unmanned, rotary, and fixed wing. This happens to be a CH-53 Chinook, the biggest helicopter we've got in the fleet, and bringing those capabilities online. And Fort Rucker down in Dothan, enterprise area, is responsible for the training. So this is another great partnership of aviation across the state a lot of people don't know about it, but it is a central part. All Army aviation and you're moving people around on the ground is the responsibility of Alabama. Redstone Arsenal also has the mission for the Missile Defense Agency. This is the home and the headquarters of the Missile Defense Agency, and that goes from ballistic threats to hypersonic threats. It goes from deploying things like the Theater High Altitude Air Defense Missile and the SM-3 to now deploying a space sensor layer to be able to sense these hypersonic missiles, so we can actually deploy things much faster. And this is countering these threats. That responsibility and engineering work is done right here in Huntsville, Alabama. Alabama is also a leader in the cyber field. May not know this, but the FBI is creating what they call their headquarters south, also on Redstone Arsenal. It's got 1,400 near-term jobs, up with about 4,000 over the next several years. Their security operations center, as they see cybercrime as a big deal, both commercial and commercial, criminal and defense related. It's a part of this. So that's all here. The Army's Missiles and Space Organization, which leads armies to protect our most critical weapon systems, is leading the charge on how do I protect weapon systems against cyber attack. Same thing is going on in the aviation group over here. The Army Space and Missile Defense Command is developing and testing new methods for cyber-oriented technologies that protect defense assets from attack. Marshall Space Flight Center at NASA has major cybersecurity responsibilities for the entire agency, including protecting NASA's global telecommunications network. And you may not know it, but Alabama's new School for Cyber and Engineering will be here in Huntsville. That will be the first charter school that is focused around cyber and electromagnetic activities. And then to feed that, the U.S. Space Camp now has a U.S. Cyber Camp. So another aspect of this. Obviously, if we're going to get to space, you got to have rockets to do that. And you know, the United Launch Alliance (ULA) builds their rockets in Decatur, Alabama. Today, they have a production line for the Delta, Delta 4 Heavy, and Atlas 5 rocket lines there. Those are shipped via barge down to either out to the West Coast or down to the Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. And this is a picture of their newest rocket, which we're actually working on at Dynetics, called the Vulcan. That Vulcan will take the place of both the Delta and Atlas lines and replace it with a single integrated launch system. Which actually, by the way, that's how we're getting our Dynetics human landing system to the moon, is on the Vulcan. Because NASA is using the big rocket, the Space Launch System, which you've all heard about. That will be the most capable human space rocket, capable of about, eventually, in its final configuration, of about 45 metric tons to translunar injection. And that'll be the heaviest lift rocket that we've had since the Saturn V's last flight. No other capability approaches this. The closest is really the Falcon 9 Heavy, but it's about 70 tons. It's still about 60% of what SLS can eventually do in its configuration, and that's obviously managed right here in Huntsville, Alabama, as well. So getting to the moon is obviously pretty critical from a lot of perspectives. And the vice president came down to Marshall Space Flight Center about 18 months ago and gave the charge that said, we want boots on the moon by 24. Well, that's a pretty tall order to be able to do that. You know, we can go plant a flag and we can go say, yep, we did that, but that's not the goal. The goal is a sustainable lunar presence. And so I want to end with this video, and then we'll go to Q&A. This video is a little long; it's about 10 minutes, but I think it'll give you a really good perspective on what we're trying to do, and we're going to highlight, obviously, the Dynetics human landing system as a part of that. So off we go.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Here we are at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center, where we can be fascinated by the story of humans landing on the moon. This is Apollo, the Greek god of sun and light, and the namesake of NASA's legacy program that sought to achieve the impossible. On July 20th, 1969, the world watched captivated by each step as NASA made history. After several more missions, Apollo came to an end, and the moon has remained largely untouched by humans for nearly 50 years. But that is not the end of the story. Apollo had a twin sister, Artemis, goddess of the moon, and her day is dawning. This new generation of astronauts, the Artemis generation, will continue the legacy of Apollo, but it will go further. It will include the first woman on the moon, the first of many. This is the future of American spaceflight. This is the Dynetics human landing system. Welcome aboard. I'm standing here at Dynetics in Huntsville, Alabama. What you see behind me is a full-scale test article of the Dynetics Human Landing System, or DHLS. While this test article will never land on the moon, it is no less critical to NASA's mission. It provides our engineers with insight into how the lander will operate and how astronauts will live, work, and interact with it during a lunar mission. With the Artemis program, NASA is making history, and the human landing system is a major piece of that story. The Artemis missions will enable sustainable human exploration of the moon. For the first time in history, we're going to explore the ice-rich lunar South Pole, studying billion-year-old ice to unlock mysteries of our solar system. We will learn how to take advantage of the moon's natural resources to build the infrastructure for a lasting lunar base. Artemis is so exciting because this mission is about more than the moon. The lessons of Artemis will provide valuable insight for future habitation on Mars and beyond. This mission is incredibly difficult, and it requires a very complex and very special lander to accomplish it. So what sets the Dynetics HLS apart? Our lander is sustainable. Not only are we designing the Dynetics HLS to achieve the 2024 crewed mission, we are designing for future missions too, with as few changes as possible. After our lander safely returns the crew to lunar orbit, it's ready to be reused. Early and ongoing reusability is key to the future of the human space program. Our lander is affordable. We have leveraged flight-proven technologies for the habitat, power, thermal, and other subsystems throughout the design process. And by designing it to be reusable, it will dramatically reduce the ongoing cost of lunar exploration and development. Our lander is incredibly versatile. Of course, the first crewed mission and crewed missions in general are our focus. But in order for the program to be truly sustainable, HLS must do more. Our innovative design enables our lander to transport, deliver, and move a huge range of payloads, from habitats to pressurized rovers, science experiments to in situ resource utilization demonstration plants. This will open opportunities for government and commercial entities to establish a lunar infrastructure and eventually a lunar economy. More than anything, the Dynetics HLS is different because it's crew-centric. We're designing our landing system with input from former and current astronauts because functionality and ease of use is paramount to us. The HLS team faces a challenging schedule with the goal of landing astronauts again by 2024. Every day is critical.
This test article is full scale, the same size as the eventual flight HLS. Inside of the crew module is spatially similar to the flight vehicle, with accurate dimensions for inner volumes, sizes of equipment, and layout. We wasted no time in developing this test article. Within 3 months of contract start, it was ready to go.
This is what we call a low-fidelity test article. It's meant to be updated. It's intended to provide a general representation of the system and enable easy, inexpensive, repetitive, and durable reconfiguration of the crew module interior. We'll be fine-tuning it in response to feedback from the crew and our human systems integration team. Also, as the design progresses, we'll build additional high-fidelity test articles. The most important part of this unit is its flexibility. Our human system integration team is already using it to review early designs, including how big things are and where they're located. The beauty is that they can make changes in real time by simply moving items from one place to another by hand. We've built volumetric models of major equipment, clearly labeled for easy identification. Most are standalone units that facilitate simple movement. If this system doesn't work here, let's move it over there.
Crew health and safety are always the #1 priority, And this test article helps the Dynetics team evaluate those critical concerns. But for a mission as complex as landing on the moon, our team must make sure the crew is operating as effectively and efficiently as they can every minute of the mission.
We're using this test article for what we call human-in-the-loop task analysis. Simply put, it means we're looking into things like habitable volume. How much space does the crew need to eat, sleep, and live? Anthropometric accommodation. How much space do the astronauts need to do every one of their many jobs? How can we make those jobs as easy as possible? And how can we make the space as comfortable as possible when they're not working? Placement and orientation of components, stowage, and interfaces. Is everything easily accessible? Have we minimized necessary movements? If something goes wrong, how easy is it for the crew to assess the problem and get access to the solution? Intravehicular and extravehicular activities. Can the astronauts move in and through the vehicle comfortably, safely? How easy and safe is it for the crew to exit the vehicle onto the lunar surface and then get back in again? How quickly can they access the tools they need? How can we efficiently accommodate lunar samples? And will it be easy for the astronauts to deploy necessary experiments?
This iterative and user-centric process ensures the most realistic, most helpful human-in-the-loop testing possible at this stage of the program. It is critical to meeting the schedule with a design that works.
The test article gives the crew and human systems integration team a feel for locations and sizes of windows, hatches, displays, buttons, and hand controllers. The crew gets an early, first-hand experience of personal accommodation. Designers get to see how the placement of seats and other structures impact the interior volume, how the crew restraints and interior mobility aids may be most effective, and how and where various crew interfaces should work. The test article helps the team understand necessary clearances for suit operations. It also gives insight into ingress and egress aids, like a ladder.
The Apollo lunar module enabled our first steps on the moon, unlocking mysteries of a solar system and enabling giant leaps toward future spaceflight. This remarkable spacecraft remains the only crewed vehicle to land anywhere beyond Earth, until now. The Dynetics HLS is similar in size to the Apollo lunar module, but is truly a next-generation lander. We designed the Dynetics HLS with input from former NASA astronauts, developing a low-slung design that maximizes safety and situational awareness for the crew. So, what makes Dynetics different? Dynetics has deep roots in the space community and a history of a strong collaboration with NASA.
Dynetics is a Huntsville company founded in 1974 in the wake of the success of the Apollo program. When it came time to put astronauts on the moon, America looked to Huntsville, Alabama. That love of exploration, of doing more, of going further. That is what fuels this town. The pride in the American space program, the excitement here is palpable. Huntsville is called the Rocket City because that is our heritage. From answering the challenge of Sputnik, to launching the Redstone rocket, to put the first American astronaut into space, to asserting American space dominance with Apollo, we changed the game. It was brilliant engineers and scientists in Huntsville who put those men on the moon. And their work here inspired our entire nation. Now, Dynetics is a part of this story. We're part of writing the next chapter, returning to the moon in an entirely different way to continue American space innovation.
Dynetics has been solving complex problems for more than 45 years. We are thrilled to have Dynetics as part of the Leidos family. We are fully committed to this endeavor, and we are proud to join this effort to launch American astronauts from American soil and return them to the moon for the first time in nearly 50 years. This is an absolute national effort. We have assembled a team from across the entire continental U.S., from 19 states and counting. Our team brings a global perspective with decades of past performance building and flying space systems for NASA and other international space agencies. This program is much broader than a new lander to get humans back to the moon. Our lander is an investment in our nation's future, not only as a cornerstone for a real space-based economy, but also to protect America's technological position as a global leader, to ensure our national security. America's vision and the entire Artemis program is truly innovative, providing the building blocks revolutionize sustainable space travel and bring future deep space exploration within our grasp.
What is next for Dynetics? Our nationwide team is working tirelessly to deliver the Artemis astronauts to the moon by 2024, continuing NASA's legacy.
One thing is for certain, our mission is NASA's mission. Exploration is in our DNA, and we view this program as core to our legacy. The Dynetics human landing system will be built right here in Alabama, and we are truly America's team.
This is the future of American spaceflight. It's history in the making, and we are ready to deliver on our commitments.
Be a part of America's mission to the moon. Learn more at Dynetics.com. Dynetics, a Leidos company.
All right. So with that, you can tell I don't have very many boring days between hypersonics and 300 kilowatt lasers and landers to go to the moon, just to name a few. It's incredibly, it's a great time to be an engineer. I consider myself first and foremost to be an engineer. Yes, I'm a leader and I'm a manager, but and putting those teams together, and those are the kind of experiences you're getting on this astrobotic team. You heard some things I think from those folks tonight that were building the lander that I'm sure you're struggling with and you're dealing with when you talk about how do I balance my requirements, how do I get things done within a certain volume swap, how do I get them done within the cost, the schedule that we have. It's not unlimited, and how do you make it all work? You know, I had to have a conversation with somebody the other day, and they were like, well, we're going to have to give up some of the sustainability. And I said, here's the thing. I said, if it can't land on the moon, I said, and get it off of it again, it doesn't matter how sustainable it is. It's got to be able to do that first. So there's a core mission you got to be able to do. And then you got to be able to look at, okay, how do I evolve that to make it sustainable for the long term? What I'm super excited about is this is not about planting flags and footprints. This is about opening up the next stage of the space economy. And this will allow us to do that. And frankly, the cool thing I love about it is it's reusable. And so we get tanked off by United Launch Alliance Vulcan rockets in near rectilinear lunar orbit. I'm sorry, near high rectilinear lunar orbit. And then we can continue to make missions back up and down from the lunar surface, which makes this quite different from Apollo. So with that, I'm going to shut up and take your questions. So back over to you. I think I started my timer. We're at about minute 47 after we got going. So you tell me when we need to quit and shoot questions at me.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Cook. I do have one question. Obviously, the power competition that's going on between the U.S. and the Soviet and the Russians and the Chinese, it manifests itself in both military capabilities as well as space-based capabilities. And this usually means a really good thing for engineers and demands for engineers. What do you see moving forward for the demand for engineers and engineering graduates in, let's say, the next 5 years?
Well, I will tell you that I've been in this, like I said, I've been in the business since '87 when I started off as a co-op. And I have never seen a market this hot for engineers in the aerospace and defense business. And I've seen some ups and downs, and we'll have other downs. But right now, we are riding a hot trail that I have never seen. We can't hire fast enough. I will tell you, we went from about 5 people working on the lunar lander when we won it to 200 in about 2.5 months. And a lot of those were recent graduates. What we did there is we teamed up folks with long-term human spaceflight experience on things like space shuttle and space station and SLS, etc., and wrap teams around them. So I right now it's incredibly good. I think the next 5 years are just the amount of opportunity out there is substantial. I mean, everybody wonders what happens when you come up to an election, and yeah, that's always a concern. Because things can change. But I will tell you, just reading the platforms of both parties and some of the core things that we will do as engineers, which is what the typical term that's used in the DoD is modernization. That is a plank platform. That is a core plank for both platforms because everybody sees the same threats and both parties see the same threat briefings. And this is not about red or blue. This is about red, white, and blue. And fundamentally, that's how we have to approach this. So I am very bullish on our business moving forward. I think there's going to be, many opportunities out there, and both in the civil and in the defense side, and not just in Huntsville. Huntsville is a very hot market right now. It's growing like crazy, but it's not just here. It's all across the country, and we're going to need. Right now NASA intends to make the down select to one or two, hopefully two, is their plan. Lunar lander providers around March 1st of this year, and then off we go. And I'll tell you, we've got about 200 in the area right now. We'll peak out at about 750. So, and about 70% of those are engineers. So you can do the math on that. That program alone will require a substantial influx of engineering talent. And the kind of experiences y'all are getting on this project, you're taking time in your evenings to go work on and do, that makes a big difference to employers like me, right? And my team that looks at the commitment and the kind of things you're doing show that you have a deep commitment and want to make a difference, because you don't get to the moon by 24 by working 8-hour days and taking off Saturdays and Sundays. It doesn't work that way, right? But what more exciting program is there to work on to be able to enable something like that?
Okay, as a follow-on question, do you think we're going to make our 2024 deadline to land on the moon?
I think technically it's doable. Programmatically, it's very difficult. And what I mean there specifically is the funding required to do that. It requires a big jump in funding in government fiscal year 21. And we've yet to see how all that will flesh itself out, but early indications are they will not get the funding enabled to make that happen. Now, do I think it's going to drag out long period of time? No. I think probably realistically we're looking at something more like 2026, and it will be a ramp, but not the insane ramp we would have to hit to make 24. We're building our plans. We're doing our PDR. So we got on contract in May. We did a systems requirements review in August, and we will do a PDR in December. And that becomes the basis of the proposal that we turn in at the same time and lay out the program. So I think technically, yes, it's very possible, but it's all dependent on money and how much flows. I think the program seems to have good bipartisan support, but frankly, that's a big lift in an election year to be able to pull off, and we're all out rooting for it and advocating for it, and I hope we get it. But we'll have a good program regardless.
Okay, so Laura, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you transfer some of the questions from our chat.
For sure. Steve, I just want to thank you again for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
We have a question from Catherine. What advice do you have for us college students going into STEM careers?
Well, number one, to keep participating in things like the Astrobotic program. I mean, it is a great, as I said earlier, when we're hiring students, we look for a few things, right? To get an interview, you need a good GPA. I mean, you just do, right? It shows you've put the time in and the effort in. So number one, focused on your studies, right? Focus on your studies and do well. Number two, look for ways to broaden yourself and show you're willing to make commitments and get things done outside of what it takes to get that done. Astrobotic is a great way to do that. The fact you're on this call tonight says a lot. And the fact you're a part of that team making that happen, because it's a lot of work. I know it is. To be able to do things like that is very important. Looking for internship and co-op opportunities is also very important. That is once you kind of get your foot in the door and get an interview, you know what employers want to know. What have you operated in the industrial world? You know what and what was your experience like with that? What did you learn from that? I will tell you that my co-op experience taught me more about what I didn't want to do as an engineer than what I did want to do, and it was great for crystallizing that for me. And I ended up I've had just a wonderful career and a blessed career coming out of that. And so looking for those kind of opportunities and for interning and getting that job experience is very important. And then I would say finally this, looking to round yourself out, right? You know, we look for when we're doing an interview, you know, I want to know you can work well with others. you don't pull off something like the lander or a common hypersonic glide body or a laser or all the other programs I talked about by working in a vacuum. And I know Dr. Ricks hammers this home all the time, but it's about how you work together, right? You can be the smartest engineer on the planet, and if you can't work with others, you're not going to get very much done, because it takes a team to pull these kind of complex systems off. And so we look really hard at and we interview for understanding, what are your social skills? You may have a great IQ, but what is your EQ, right? What's your emotional intelligence, and how do you use that? And have you participated in other things? Have you been involved with other charitable works? Have you been involved with speeches? Can you communicate well? Can you get along well with others? Those are important. Those soft skills become really important. So that sounds like a lot, and it is, because a lot's in line, right? Go back to my premise here about great power competition. The Chinese and the Russians aren't putting their second line folks to make this happen. It takes top-notch talent to be able to do that, and that takes a well-rounded individual to be able to do that. And I am a big proponent of that.
All right, thank you. A question from Madison: how long has sustainability been an objective of Dynetics and your project?
So particularly for the lander, actually, since we went after it, NASA came out in 2019 and said they were looking for folks to work on a new human lunar lander, and wanted some folks to bring concept ideas. We competed and won some small concept studies, and NASA said, look, we want to figure out a way to create a truly lunar economy out of this, right? Where it's not all reliant on government dollars in the long run to do this. They understand government's required to help foot stomp it and get it going, but just like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Boeing have done some things to get commercial delivery going to low Earth orbit, and soon Virgin Galactic. How do we expand that sphere, right, to include cislunar space? And so that requires a sustainable approach. And so we sat down and thought about it a lot, and got different ideas from people and said, what does a sustainable architecture mean? What does that mean? And how do we lay that out? And what came from it is the architecture that you saw in the video earlier. So it's been a goal of ours for the last couple of years since we dove into this, but this program has been moving really at light speed since then, and not taking a break.
All right. So John asks, how reusable is the lander? Does it need to be refurbished after every mission, or can it be left in orbit of the moon awaiting new cargo and fuel?
Nope, its goal is to be left in low lunar orbit. I don't know the number of missions we're designing for right off the bat. I should know that, but I don't know what the requirement. We will self-set that requirement, because NASA is buying services down to the moon. So it's really up to us how we want to do that and how we bake that in economically. But we did that economic analysis. I just don't remember what the number is off the top of my head. But it will be, we will transit back and forth from near high rectilinear lunar orbit down to the surface and back. ULA, we have hired not just to bring our lander out there initially. Of course, we hope to have multiple of these landers, right, doing multiple things, multiple bases around the moon. And they're going to be they'll deliver the lander out, and that's great. Need that first. Crew will come out on the SLS. That's great, because it's got the Orion spacecraft on board, and it's a human-rated system. But ULA also then comes out with tankers, and they've designed a tanker that rides on top of their launch vehicle that will ride out and will fuel up our methane and fuel up our cryogenic methane and fuel up our cryogenic LOX. And they've been doing a lot of research and development around that for the last 10 years. And they're like, it's time to bring this technology forward. We agreed. And so they'll come and fuel us up. So we are a single stage system. That video you saw there showed us throwing off drop tanks. We've actually gotten rid of that. And now we're using a single stage approach to reduce the amount of, to increase the amount of reusability. That's the part of the things that go on in the development of a design. It changes and it morphs as you go. And like any system, we'll learn a lot from this first one, and we'll incorporate that in to number 2, number 3, until you get finally to a kind of an operational cadence state.
Very good. I know that cryofluid management is one of the up-and-coming technologies of the field.
It is, and you know, it's a technology that its time has come, right? We've been working on it for a long time, doing ground demonstrations, some space demonstrations. It's time to go do it. And there's times when you just the only way you're going to get it done is to engineer it, develop it, and go do it. And we believe that technology is at that place.
Very good. Liam asks, what are you most excited about in the next 5 years in the aerospace field?
Well, number one, putting the first woman and returning a man to the moon. I grew up. I grew up watching Apollo 17 lift off. I remembered that. I was 5, and I don't remember much, but I remember standing in front of the TV, and there's a picture of me doing it too. And that's a long time ago. That's 1972. I think I'm older than Dr. X, but anyway, I remembered that, and I grew up in, I came of age in the 1970s and the late early 80s, and I remember in junior high sneaking out of class to go watch in the library the launch of Columbia on STS-1 in 1981. And that just captivated me, right? And I'm the Stranger Things, by the way. I know you all watch that. That's my generation in that show. So I can totally get down with that, and I laugh at it, but that's my era right there. I'm the high school one, in that era of that one. And so I was captivated by space. And, I capped off my NASA career by flying NASA's first rocket designed for humans called the Ares 1X. The first test flight they'd done since STS-1, and I was the program manager for that. Wonderful experience. And I came to Dynetics to start a space group. We didn't do space. The company made a decision to get into space by building a very nice microsatellite, kind of as a starter project. And then really it was kind of like, all right, go figure out what we're going to go do next. And so that was my job. And to go watch our company go from, not even being in the space business 11 years ago to we're in the thick of competition because of all the other programs we've done, both in defense and with NASA. Since then, just 11 years later, we're working in the thick of a competition against, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. How cool is that? So there's a lot of other things I'm looking forward to, but I'll tell you what, that's top of my personal list because it goes to the core of why I got in the business. And you can still, I hope, see it in my excitement here at, age 53.
Thank you. BJ asks, since Dynetics and Spacex are both HLS companies chosen by NASA, what is your opinion on SpaceX as a whole, specifically with Starship and Super Heavy?
So I think SpaceX has done some amazing things, right? They came along, they were the upstart. And everybody was very skeptical. I met with them early on when I was at NASA, and I worked hard to try to help transfer our technology to them because, fundamentally, I believe in a commercialized environment. And it took them longer than they thought it was going to take, but you can't but be impressed with what they've been able to pull off with both Dragon and Falcon 9. And they took technology that already existed, right? They weren't the first ones to vertically land a rocket. We did that at NASA, and actually the Missile Defense Agency did it first in 1993, and then NASA followed suit with a follow-on vehicle. And they weren't the first to do a lot of the things they did, but they were the first to make it commercially viable, and that's a big deal. And that was kind of their start into this, and it forced the other bigger companies to say, like Boeing and Lockheed, oh, we better do things differently, right? We've gotten very slow and very antiquated. We were taking too long to develop everything, and it was like, okay, everybody better get on their game. So they drove everybody to be better by doing that. And then along came, Jeff Bezos, and now here we are, right? And so we're kind of a middle ground, right? We don't have any Elon Musk running around here or Jeff Bezos. We don't have any billionaires. But we do think like they do in terms of how do I bring innovation fast, how do I do it well, and how do I do it in partnering with NASA. So I'm impressed by what they've done. I'll leave my comments for my competition on Starship since they're direct out of this for tonight. But they will. I'm sure they'll make their case, and we'll make our case, and we'll see what happens.
Very good, thank you. This is a question from me. How can we use the technology and operation tactics developed for national defense in other ways, like hypersonic passenger jets and faster Earth-to-space travel?
great question. So funny enough, the push in hypersonics actually started with something back in the mid 1980s called the National Aerospace Plane, or the X-30. You can Google that. Really cool idea. It was called the Orient Express. How do I get around the globe? You know, not with supersonic flight in hours, but how do I get there in, you know, an hour or less? And what does that look like? And that takes a hypersonic system to do that. And the technologies to enable a platform like that, I think, are within our grasp for the first step. In other words, I think we can develop a sustainable Mach 5, Mach 6 capable aircraft now. The technology exists to do that. I can take off like an airplane with a turbojet, transition to a ramjet, transition to a scramjet, and then back. It depends on how fast you want to go. If I start moving at scramjet speed further and further up, it gets harder and harder from a materials perspective to do that. Funny enough, my son's PhD is in that arena at Bama in high temperature materials. So I think it will come. I think we're close to enabling that. I think the first things we're going to do are going to be around smaller, compact weapon systems. But the next step, and it's on the DoD's plan, is to do this for a unmanned weapons platform. And frankly, I've actually helped do a business case for another company a few years ago. And you can make a business case for a Mach 5 to 6 business jet and make money, and it will work. So it's just a matter of when people see enough of the market need to say, I'm ready to go invest in that and go do that. And frankly, I think they'll look for the DoD to make the initial steps to really get the technological risk down before you're going to see a lot of money go into that area. But you're already seeing it in supersonics with things like low boom technologies that NASA has helped enable and making that happen. So I'm way over, and I'm actually not in total time, but I'm over. And so maybe just one more question and we'll call it a night.
Yeah, for sure. I think we'll end with Greg's question. What's the possibility of our team touring the facility where you're working on the lander model?
Oh, we can make that happen. We've got to get to where we're allowing bigger tours like that. But as soon as COVID will allow it and allow you all to travel safely and us to allow larger groups through, we can do that. So Dr. Rick, check back with me after the first of the year. We'll see where everybody's at. But we'd love to show you the full scale mock-up. And by the way, it changes literally every day. Those engineers are in there. As great as CAD is, right? And y'all work with that a lot. As great as that is, there's something about a tactile feel where you can get in there and vision. And great as three-dimensional caves are, and we're actually putting one of those in. There is nothing like standing in front of something and looking around. That tactile feel the human brain has in that kind of environment, and it's not hard to do and create. And we found it to be of incredible value, and we made it, like you saw in the video, very changeable. Right? I mean, they're literally magnets behind the wall is steel, and there are magnets behind those things, and they move them around and they create them and they cut foam and they put it up. And those displays are coming from a partnership with Johnson Space Center, who's helping us do our display design. And they're working in there. We've got astronauts working in there pretty regularly. So we'd love to have you through as soon as it's safe.
Thank you very much. We will definitely be looking forward to that. I want to say another thank you. Thanks for taking the time to speak with us. We always appreciate hearing from Dynetics, and especially from you. So thank you.
Yes.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much. We really appreciate the support you guys have given us in the past, and looking forward to continuing that relationship in the future. And I'll reach back out to you in a couple months to see if we can organize a tour of up in Huntsville. And you let us know if there's anything we can do to help you guys. If you're on campus, let us know, and we'll give you a tour of our lab or whatever.
When you guys can do that, I would love to do that, and love to see what you're working on, because obviously we're starting to think about ISRU. In fact, we're probably going to do some internal research and development this next year around that, because if we've got the ship to get you there, now we want to start talking about what other things can we do with that. So, and producing locks on the moon is probably our number one challenge, and we want to go tackle. So, you guys, what you're working on is will actually be very, very helpful for that. So, with that, have a great night. Big Roll Tide, and let's win against Tennessee.
Roll Tide, Steve. Thank you very much.
Roll Tide.
See you soon.